So Psalm 23 has really two main application sentences. And one is in verse 1, I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And the second one, and the one that we're going to be focusing on mainly tonight, is in verse 4. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And that's a striking verse because each and every one of us is afraid of something. Each and every one of us is afraid of something. And me, by personality, I don't know if it's personality or just I write it off as personality as an excuse, but I am a very fearful person. Remember growing up, and do you still learn stranger danger in school? Is that still a thing? So I remember after learning stranger danger, I thought every car that drove past me while I was walking home from school was going to kidnap me. So I would legit run home from school. As soon as I'm out the door, I'm running as fast as I can to get home just because I'm terrified of every single car. It is. It really is. It really is. I mean, I'm safe now, so clearly none of them were, but I'm also deathly afraid of heights. And that's any kind of height. Like sitting on this stool right now is a little shaky for me. Right? No, not that, but for real. I remember being in the theater watching Mission Impossible. I think it was Ghost Protocol, the one where he's in Dubai, and he's running on the side of the building, and you just look down, and all you see is just your impending death waiting to meet you. And my brother goes, "Feel my hand," and we both touched hands, and it was the wettest high five I've ever had. And this doesn't get better with age because last week Faye and I were watching TV, and there's a scene where the people in the show, they're just out on a ledge, and they don't even show you looking down. They just show you the ledge. And I said, "Faye, feel my hand," and I was drenched. It's just this uncontrollable fear. And we laugh about it in these things, but many of us go through life looking at every circumstance with just this uncontrollable fear. And one of the reasons that this psalm was written is so that God's people, so that people who follow Jesus would know that with him, no matter what the circumstance is in life, God is bigger than that circumstance. And with him, fear is transformed into something else. And so as we meditate on this psalm tonight, I want us to think about two things that this psalm does for us with our fears. First, it's that fear is transformed into peace in God's presence. Fear becomes peace in God's presence. And secondly, fear becomes courage when we trust in God's purpose. Fear becomes peace in God's presence, and fear becomes courage when we trust in God's presence. So look at verse 4. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? For you are with me. The source of peace, source of comfort, in the valley of the shadow of death, the darkest of darkest places, is what? It's that God is present with David here. It's that God is present with him. I will fear no evil, for you are with me. For you are with me. And David knows God's presence in two ways in this psalm. One, he knows it by experience. He knows it by experience. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, verse 4, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. He's experienced God's comfort. He's experienced God working in his favor, even in circumstances that are dark, even in circumstances that are difficult. He's experienced God providentially working for his own good. I remember reading a book last year called The Mystery of Divine Providence, and what the author suggested for Christians to do, one of the things that would be good for our souls, is if we kept a record of all the ways that God's providence has benefited us. All the ways where you thought life was going to turn out a certain way, and God turned it another way for good. right? So in the sense that when I was in high school, I was 100% sure I was going to marry someone. And I didn't marry that person. I married someone different. And that is a good thing, right? There are in so many ways in all of our lives. Talk to any of your youth leaders tonight in your small group and ask them if God has done something good for them by his providence. And they will be able to tell you countless numbers of examples. And one of the reasons that we give in to fear when times get tough is we tend to forget how God has providentially been for our good in the past. And when God is for our good in our past, it means he'll be good for our good in the present and for our good in the future. He has been faithful, he is faithful, he will be faithful. The author of Hebrews says he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so David, writing this psalm, has had the experience of God's presence in difficult times and has seen that God's presence turns things for good. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So he knows God's presence by experience, but more than that, he knows God's presence by promise. He knows God's presence by promise. Because sometimes our experience can kind of lead us to question whether or not God is actually present. If you're going through some form of a tragedy, right? Someone in your family gets cancer, right? Someone in your family gets another kind of sickness. Something happens in your life and you have no idea what to do about it or what to do with it or how you are going to cope with it. In that moment, our experience of the moment can lead us to think that God might not actually be present. And so beyond our experience, David knows God is for him and with him by promise, because God's promise is sure. And that promise comes in verse 1. The Lord is my shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. Notice that he doesn't say the Lord is shepherd, just blank. Or the Lord is the shepherd, or the Lord is a shepherd. But it's personal. The Lord is my shepherd. And what David says of himself here is true of anyone who follows Jesus. The Lord is my shepherd. And what that means is that a shepherd is bound, almost by duty, to care for their own sheep. Think of the parable of the lost sheep in Luke 15, and Jesus says the shepherd leaves 99 of his sheep to go and find one when one goes missing. Why? Because the sheep is his. The shepherd is duty bound to care for his own sheep. Or in John chapter 10, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I lay my life down for my sheep, and I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them in also. The shepherd, in a sense, is duty bound to bring all of his sheep into his flock, into his care, into his protection. And so the promise, the Lord is my shepherd. God has bound himself to his people to care for them, to be for them, and to be with them, to be present with them. That's why in the prophets, one of the names that the Messiah was going to be called by is Emmanuel, God with us, because the Lord is my shepherd. We know his presence by promise. We know his presence by promise. And one of the things that this helps us with when we're in the thick of difficult circumstances is it reminds us that since God has bound himself by promise to be for his people, then even in difficult circumstances, God is faithful to his promise. God will not leave his promise unfulfilled just because your life got flipped upside down. In fact, and I've known this in my own life, it's when our circumstances feel most out of our control that God proves himself to be most faithful. And it's interesting, if you look at the psalm, there's 2 lines in the entire psalm where David looks at the circumstances around him. 2 lines. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, line 1, and verse 5, you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. Those are the only 2 lines where David focuses on his trouble, as it were. And often when our circumstances lead us to be gripped by fear, it's because we're magnifying our circumstances in front of us. When we magnify our circumstances, we make God look small. But what David does in this psalm is the opposite. He magnifies God, and therefore, even in difficult circumstances, has no fear. Because look at all the things he says about God. The Lord is my shepherd. The Lord makes me lie down in green pastures. The Lord leads me by still waters. The Lord restores my soul. The Lord leads me in paths of righteousness. The Lord is with me. The Lord comforts me by his rod and his staff. The Lord prepares a table before me. The Lord anoints my head with oil. The Lord makes my cup overflow. The Lord follows me with his goodness and mercy all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord. And you can imagine David writing the psalm and looking around him and seeing all the difficulties of his circumstances. And he's not undermining those, not in any way. But he's choosing to fix his eyes on the Lord because it's the Lord who gets him through those circumstances. It's the Lord who leads him. It's the Lord who carries him. It's the Lord who withholds him and sustains him and restores him. And so he's choosing to focus on his help in his moment of desperation, rather than that circumstance. And I find that to be super helpful, because my tendency in difficult circumstances is to magnify the circumstance in front of me and to be terrified because either I can't control it, I have no idea what to do with it, or no idea what will come at the end of it. And so resting in God's presence is an active choice to focus on God's goodness even in our most difficult times. And as Christians, we have an abundance of goodness to focus on. Because what will always be true is that Jesus Christ has came to this world, died for your sins, saved you, and made you his own, and brought you into his flock, into his fold. And that never changes. That promise stays with you wherever you go. That promise stays with you whatever trouble you face. But we can't assume that the promise is for us if we are choosing not to follow the Lord. Because look at what he says. The Lord is my shepherd. He leads me beside still waters. He leads me in paths of righteousness. If you are not following God, surrendering your life to Jesus and following him, you cannot expect these promises to be true for you when you face difficulty. It might happen, but God has not bound himself by his covenant if you are not following him. But to those who give their life to Jesus, this promise is for you. So we can rest in God's presence, and fear is transformed into peace when we follow Jesus and rest in his presence. And secondly, fear becomes courage when we trust in God's purpose. Fear becomes courage when we trust in God's purpose. If you follow the flow of this psalm, you follow David being led through green pastures, beside still waters, through the valley of the shadow of death, surrounded by his enemies, into the house of the Lord. Every step of the journey is the right way to get into the house of the Lord. It's the right way for God to take David into the house of the Lord. And that means that for David, the valley of the shadow of death was the road he needed to take. And for many of us, we have this understanding or belief or sense of entitlement that if we follow Jesus, life gets easier. If we follow Jesus, then our life automatically gets better. And Jesus, in a sense, doesn't let us think that way. Because he says, especially in the Gospels, you hear Jesus talk about people wanting to follow him. He says, here's what it's going to look like. You're going to take up your cross. You're going to carry your cross if you're going to follow me. You're going to have to die to yourself in order to live for me and with me. And Paul in Galatians 2:20 He says that he has died to himself so that he might live by faith in Jesus Christ. And David, in this psalm, the road into the house of the Lord goes through the valley of the shadow of death. And I imagine you've been in an experience like this where you gave your life to Jesus. And however long after that, a few weeks, a couple months, you're looking at it going, I thought life was supposed to be better. Why does everything seem harder? Reality is, all of us will walk through a valley at some point in our lives. And looking at the psalm, it's God who leads David into and through the valley. So every single one of us will be led by God into difficult circumstances, into suffering, as it were. Right? Jesus was led into the suffering of the cross. But the purpose of God is not to leave you there. The purpose of God is to carry you through that and into, as David says, the house of the Lord forever. Right? Jesus endured the cross for the crown of glory that was on the other side. And God brings his people through suffering in this life for the glory that awaits in the next life. Living with God forever. In verse 5, a table before me in the presence of my enemies, anointing my head with oil, my cup overflows. Welcome to a meal with God in his house as his honored guest, cup overflowing, filled with more than we could imagine. But the path to glory goes through the valley of the shadow of death. And I was reading an article the other day, and the title of the article was called Why We Suffer, or something along those lines. And one of the things that this author said, and I've heard him speak about it, he can give his own testimony and about some of his own family trials. And one of the things he said was, one of the reasons we go through suffering is one, so that God can prove himself faithful. And two, we go through suffering so that we have nowhere else to put our trust but in God's purposes. We have no one else to put our trust in except God. It's not until you realize how helpless you are that you understand how faithful God is to help. That you understand how full God's provision is in Christ for you. And we'll be gripped by fear until we can trust in God's purposes. You look ahead to your future, you have no idea what's in front of you. You might have plans, but all those plans can fall apart at the drop of a hat. At the snap of your fingers, they can all fall apart. Right? And so we can't trust in our own plans. We can't trust in our own purposes. But God's purpose is trustworthy. Because this psalm reminds us, whatever happens in life, God is using it and turning it and leading you into it to bring you through it so that he will bring you into the house of the Lord forever. So with Jesus, whatever difficult circumstance you're in right now, Jesus is your help to endure that circumstance, to get through it. By looking to him, focusing on God's provision, not magnifying your circumstances, but magnifying God's great, glorious provision. And looking to him, and in looking to him, realizing that in him you have all that you need. For fear to be transformed into peace, and for fear to become courage. That happens in Christ.